So we're really pleased to be able to wrap up this very rich time together with a very special guest speaker. We're very pleased he was able to join us this evening. His name is Roy L. Austin Jr., and he is in March 2014, he joined the White House Domestic Policy Council as Deputy Assistant to the President for the Office of Urban Affairs, Justice, and Opportunity. In this position, Mr. Austin coordinates the formulation and implementation of policy covering criminal justice, civil rights, housing, it goes on and on, housing, labor, human services, and initiatives such as Promise Zones. And he's also a member of the My Brother's Keeper task force. Roy Austin began his legal career investigating and prosecuting hate crimes and police brutality cases around the country. He has also worked on complex civil and white-collar criminal cases, including a successful pro bono civil lawsuit aimed at preventing racial profiling by the California Highway Patrol. In 2002, he joined the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, where he prosecuted domestic violence, adult and child sexual assault, human trafficking, homicide, and fraud and public corruption cases. In 2009, he joined the U.S. Attorney's Office as a Senior Assistant United States Attorney and coordinator of the D.C. Human Trafficking Task Force. In January of 2010, Roy Austin was appointed Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, where he supervised the criminal section and the special litigation section's law enforcement portfolio, which includes police departments, correction, and juvenile justice. Among numerous other matters, he has worked on cases involving the New Orleans Police Department, the Missoula, Montana Law Enforcement, and the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. He has also served as an adjunct trial advocacy professor at George Washington University Law School. He is a graduate of Yale University and received his JD from the University of Chicago, and he is originally from State College, Pennsylvania. He is joined tonight, we have two extra special guests at our table. We have Trey and Peyton, his children, who are with us because their mother, Tracy, is traveling. So we're very pleased to have the Austin family with us. So please continue your applause to welcome Roy Austin.
Well, thank you very much for the applause. It's very important that you gave that applause to me now because I want to be able to tell, I want my kids to be able to tell my wife that I actually received an applause. And so that's good, and now I can leave. So thank you. So law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice. And when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. Let me say that again. Law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. That is the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. So law and order does not exist for the purpose of locking up children. And law and order does not exist for the purpose of locking up those suffering from mental disabilities. And as we learned in Ferguson, law and order does not exist for the purpose of locking up jaywalkers. So if we are going to establish justice, we have to look at our criminal justice and juvenile justice systems. And we all have heard the numbers that we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's inmates. And we are not that criminal a society. We are the most wealthy, strongest nation on this earth. So why are we locking up so many people? And why are we locking them up for so long? And why are we locking them up for the reasons that we are locking them up? And isn't it about time we stopped? For the first time in probably close to 40 years, we have seen our crime rate and our incarceration rate go down at the same time. We have just gone through one of the worst recessions that this nation has ever had, and yet our crime rate did not go up. There is no better time than right now for us to reform our criminal justice system. And the real question is, because we have this amazing confluence of the left and the right believing in the same thing right now on criminal justice reform, is what's taking so long? What are we waiting for? Even last year we had legislation about front-end reform and back-end reform that was getting out of the Judiciary Committee without any trouble. And yet what are we waiting for? Because every single day and every single moment that someone is locked up that doesn't need to be locked up, we have destroyed a life, destroyed a family, severely injured a community. So the real question is why not now? Why not immediately? We look at what we found when we looked at school discipline, and the fact that 4-year-old children, primarily African American boys, were being disciplined, more so than their white mates. Well, you take a child out of school, you expel them, you suspend them, you start that cycle downward where they lose the hope and opportunity that all children should have. We can't keep doing this. And so there's this school discipline guidance out there that everyone in this room should take a look at, and everyone should take to their school board and to their mayors and ask them, are we doing this in our school? Are we making sure that we're giving our teachers the tools that they need so that they're not kicking kids out of school unnecessarily? And we need to be looking at what we're doing with respect to our courts. There's this huge desire by some to make sure that we have drug courts and veterans courts and mental health courts, a chance for someone who really understands the addiction of drugs, that understands that mental illness is not repaired by incarceration, that really know that the veterans who give their lives for this nation deserve another opportunity when they make a mistake. So why aren't we pushing for more of these courts? Because these courts actually seem to work. We realize we don't have to lock up everyone who makes a mistake, and these courts actually seem to work. And so what are we doing, though, when we have people who are incarcerated to make sure that when they get out, because as everyone in this room knows, the vast majority of them are going to get out. What are we doing to make sure that they get out and they are successful? Locking them up in solitary confinement, locking them up with no programming for mental health, no programming for education, no programming for job skills, and then they get out and they recidivate? I sometimes mention that I seem to give far too many speeches where I'm preaching to the choir, but here I'm preaching to the preachers, so I'm really, I'm really not sure that you need to hear this, but we'll say it anyway, which is, what are we doing to ensure that the programming that they have is the programming that's going to make them successful? And we have to do this. And there's correctional education guidance that was put out by the Department of Education and Department of Justice. And just like that school discipline document, I ask you to take a look at that document and take it to your sheriffs and take it to your city councils and ask them, what are we doing on correctional education to make sure that we're giving people the tools that they need to succeed? And then when people get out, we have to look at the completely unnecessary collateral consequences that are out there for people who are formerly incarcerated. Okay? If we are a nation about redemption, then we have to make sure that when a person does their time, the time that we ask them to do, that we then give them the tools that they need to succeed and not lock them out. So why are there 40,000? That's the number that the ABA came up with the Department of Justice. 40,000 collateral consequences for the formerly incarcerated. How do we expect them to succeed? So we have to do something about these silly licenses that some people have to get. And I'm not even sure which direction it goes, but you can be a hair washer, but you can't be a barber, or you could be a server, but you can't be a receptionist. I mean, there are these licenses that make no sense. We want people to succeed, they need to be able to get jobs. Now, we're hearing more and more and more and more of your communities are out there banning the box. Yes. It just makes common sense. We know that Johns Hopkins Medical Center, one of the largest employers in the state of Maryland, has banned the box. Okay? We go there for our most important needs. And there are people who are working there who are formerly incarcerated. And if you ask Johns Hopkins Medical Center about that, they will tell you they are absolutely their best workers. They are people who really and truly understand and believe in the importance of work. But they're no different than so many others of our formerly incarcerated. We know that Home Depot also bans the box. And all that means is when people apply for a job, they don't have to check a box at the very beginning that says they have a criminal history. Now, there's some rooms where I can say this, probably not this room, but in some rooms, if you turn to your right or you turn to your left, or you yourself, one of those people is formerly incarcerated. This probably is not that same room, but about one third of the working people. Oh, now you're checking your neighbors. You're like, all right. So, oh, that's true. You've all probably been arrested for something. But 1/3 of working aged Americans have a criminal history such that they would have to check off a box if they were asked about their criminal history on a job application. That's a lot of people. That's tens of millions of fellow Americans who have to check off that box. And so we need to be doing more to make sure that people can succeed when they're formerly incarcerated. Now, I know that there's this discussion about, well, should we do front-end reform or should we do back-end reform? And that's kind of the discussion that a lot of people are having right now with some of the legislation that is up there. But why don't we just reform it all? Why don't we go for comprehensive criminal justice reform? So we're talking front end. We're talking let's lower mandatory minimums or make them rarer, or let's not use it for your simple possessor of drugs. So let's deal with that front end. Let's make sure that the Fair Sentencing Act is retroactively applied because it was crazy. Because it was crazy that we treated crack and cocaine so differently for so long. Why don't we make sure that there is enough money for programs for those who are incarcerated? So in the middle, and let's make good time credit real. If you are incarcerated and you are doing everything right, then why are we going to leave you in there for the maximum length of time? We can do front end, we can do back end, we can start talking about the restoration of rights. Okay? Because you are a felon who possessed marijuana at some point in your life, you shouldn't be able to vote? That doesn't make sense. And we have to start doing things that actually make sense. So what is the argument for all of this? I'm here in a room of people of faith. So I suspect that there's the moral and ethical side of this. But maybe your neighbors are concerned about the financial piece of this. And there is nothing crazier than locking up this many people for this long on the economic side of things. New York City spends $160,000 per year per person it is incarcerating. $160,000 per year. That is insane. That's a lot of college educations. That's a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists. That's a lot of mental health training. That's a lot of skills training. That's a lot of teachers. Across the country, in a survey that just looked at 40 states, they found that we were spending $40 billion a year on incarceration. Again, better used on teachers and doctors, better used on our kids in our communities than in locking people out of our communities. So we can make the moral or ethical argument. We could also make the financial argument for why this is the right thing to do. And I really do think that it is the right thing to do. And our president, when talking about police and community issues, said something, he says a lot of really profound things, but here he said something quite simple, and that is that people aren't making it up. When people talk about the problems that they have in their communities with police officers, they're not just making it up. And suddenly we're all seeing it. We're seeing incident after incident that is captured on video that is telling the story that minority men have been saying for decades. So they're not making it up. There's a problem. And the president created a task force on 21st century policing that put out about 60 recommendations that the hope is now, and that was made up of law enforcement officers, it was made up of rank and file representatives, it was made up of civil rights advocates, it was made up of youth. They came together and came up with these 60 recommendations on ways that we could be better, that we could deal with things like implicit bias, that we could deal with things like just plain old training, that we could get our officers thinking in the guardian mentality as opposed to the warrior mentality. Okay? For our police officers, it should not be us against them. It should be we are guarding our most precious asset, which is our community, which is the children who walk through our streets, which is the adults who are trying to lift up those children. They should be guarding those. And that's the mentality. And this report talks about that. And this report talks about the safety and wellness of officers. Look, they have a tough job. They have stresses. They need assistance just like everyone else, and we should be able to provide it for them. And so when we're talking about comprehensive criminal justice reform, it also talks about this whole kind of quota system on You know, how many people are you going to arrest to create revenue for your town or city? We need to be more honest about how we are funding the things that we need and not put it on the backs of the poor and those unable to pay. I mean, failure to have your car registered, jaywalking, contempt of cop where you mouth off a little bit. Those aren't the things that should land you in jail. Those aren't the things that should cause you to lose your job, that should mess up your family life, that should give your children an example of a father or mother sitting in jail. Those are the things that we have to find as a society to be better about. So on the not making it up side, the president made it clear that he'd like to see body cameras in far more places. And we are working on what will be a toolkit to help law enforcement agencies put that together, to make sure that we are telling the right story, so that, because you know what, both sides of the camera behave differently. Okay? I mean, we want our police to behave as best as they can, but we also want to make sure that the people who are out there on the street also know they're on candid camera and know that they can't be misbehaving. So again, law and order exists for the purpose of establishing justice. So let's make it exist for that purpose. And let's remove the structured dams that block the flow of social progress. If we put all these formerly incarcerated people to work, how much stronger would we be? How much greater a nation would we be if we stopped blocking their progress? And so, Psalms 106:3 says, "Blessed are they who maintain justice, who constantly do what is right." Keep doing what is right. I appreciate your time.